Hi, and welcome to the Brain Trust. Today we have Brooke Dammkoeler, Scott Greene, and Jonathan Arnold, and we might be joined by some other. And we're going to be discussing that all-important topic. What great movies do you know that are, for one reason or another, not on the general consensus of great movies? That these are ones that you happen to love and think are actually bona fide great films, but they've just somehow slipped through the cracks. So let me start with Brooke. Brooke, what's a movie that you love and you think is actually a good movie, but for some reason other people don't seem to be aware of it?
Well, I have a couple. I think recently, Uncut Gems. That I thought that was an extraordinary movie. Adam Sandler's performance was outstanding. It was a really great crime thriller. These characters were believable. The situation was real. Anyone who spent any time in New York knows that this was a real universe, real people. And I think the couple of years ago, the awards season completely blocked this movie, especially Adam Sandler's performance. I think it was definitely worthy of nominations. So, plus it's a very good movie overall, not just his performance. So I think that's a recent one. And then I have one back from...
No, let's actually talk about that a little bit more. What's something that you in particular liked about it that should have been a reason for people to gather around it?
Well, I think the narrative, the story was compelling, and Adam Sandler really sold that character and the world. I mean, these were real people, real situations, and you could see how everything was careening towards the tragic end that he got himself into. Not that he, I don't want to give any spoilers, but as I said before, anyone who spent any time in New York City knows that this was this story resonated, rang very, very true. These characters, the situation, this kind of twilight, quasi-legal, quasi-illegal commerce going on. People gaming the system, trying to get ahead, getting the money. Always on the make, and clans, families, and those are all ethnically defined. So it was just a lot of things. I just thought it was outstanding. It was gripping, compelling. I loved every minute of watching it. I was on the roller coaster for the narrative.
Well, the movie made about $50 million on a $19 million budget. And in the old days, that would have been a very reputable return on it. Yeah. So I'm actually thinking it probably did okay.
Yeah, I think it did. I'm just saying that it just didn't get the recognition, the Hollywood hype recognition that I think it should have. With Adam Sandler perhaps getting some nominations for his performance. I just don't recall it being talked about a lot. Maybe I'm wrong.
I find it, it was made by A24, which has been in the news recently because they're trying, they put out an offer that they're willing to be bought. And they're wanting somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion for their for buying everything they had. Okay. They have this new movie called Zola that's coming out.
Right. Reading about
that. I think is probably the reason they're looking to sell, because I'm getting the feeling, because I looked at the trailer for that and it looked problematic. And I'm wondering if part of the challenge that Uncut Gems had is because it came from A24, which is kind of one of these companies that everyone talks about wanting to make movies with, because it's certainly had certain ones that have done quite well.
Mhm.
And I'm going to forget the name of it. Last year in particular, about the girl who is going away to college, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it.
Okay.
But they've had a lot of really solid films. But I'll bet you that part of it is that they're considered to be a company that makes good movies. And there's a part of me that has this suspicion that Hollywood doesn't like that nomenclature for a company, because good movie for some reason has become equated in the minds of a lot of a lot of the upper level of the industry as meaning you don't make money, that you make failures, that you're merely making movies that are entertaining, not ones that can franchise out to bazillions of dollars. And I think that's sad, especially when you have an actor like Adam Sandler, who's clearly trying to make a difference and prove that he can change over the course of his career and try braver and more different things.
Yeah.
I was going to say that one of the problems is when one company is designated to make good films, it seems to be implying that everybody else is not making good films, that they're making the latest 3D animated Unreal piece of sci-fi junk that is very entertaining, but you forget it the moment you're out of the theater. And I wonder if maybe, Adam Sandler did an incredible job in it, but there may have been some carryover from the attitudes toward him from his comedies that made people maybe less interested.
Absolutely.
In seeing it.
I think there was some prejudice against that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, look at
what's your favorite scene in this movie?
Is that for question for me or for?
Yes. What's your favorite scene in it?
Oh my.
Or what's a moment in it? If you were going to tell someone why you love this movie, what's that one moment that you go, that's why?
I could answer that.
Yes, Jonathan.
Because I was going to say that one too. And a couple things I liked about Uncut Gems. I think Adam Sandler is actually a good actor. Many comedians have a broader range than people think. Right. I like the fact that every single character in that movie played a key role, and they could have been leads. I mean, Eric Bogosian was in that too. He was brilliant. I like that scene where they're kind of stuck in the glass security booth, and there's that switch that happens right before the ending. And Brooke, I won't ruin it either. But all the characters are very, very believable, and it resonated with me personally because I had done some insurance fraud defense related to some jewelers, both in downtown LA and New York, way back in the day. And it was like, yeah, this is pretty close to what that industry is like. So it was very believable. I like the pacing. I like the realism. And it was, it did quite well. But I think it was one of those movies where it's like, he was playing against character. So it reminded me, Robin Williams did a movie, and it came to mind, though I can't remember the name of it, where he played, he worked in like a photo department of something, but it was actually a very creepy, stalky guy, and he played it really well. And I felt it was kind of analogous to Adam Sandler.
Was that 24-hour photo?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Brooke. That was it. I thought it was very analogous to that. And the movie did well financially. It was just, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes something just doesn't get a lot of press or buzz. And, it's just like, I got to say, like, Scott, I'm right there with you. There's just so much 3D sci-fi extravaganza crap out there. It's like, if it's not Wonder Woman 80 crap or whatever it is, it's like people aren't paying attention to it at all. Or I should say, the media that would normally market that is like, it just, if it's not a hit, the old saying I learned in Paramount, being trained in the dark arts of media marketing, it's like, it's either a hit or it's shit. Was sort of the way that stuff is approached. And it's like, no, it's not Star Wars, whatever it is, but it was a very well done movie.
So Jonathan, let me ask you, what's the first movie that you would like to recommend to us today? That's one that's great, but for some reason or another, it's somehow either fallen off the roster, or it's one that people don't really know.
Yeah. Well, I've got two in mind, but to be somewhat current, even though now it's dated back, and it has.
Oh, there's no reason to be current, and we'll come around for more than one try at this.
Yeah, I would actually say it has an ick factor to the subject matter, but I thought Boogie Nights was an incredibly well done movie, and that's when you had an ensemble cast. The music worked, the characters worked, the story worked. I thought it was probably the best thing that Burt Reynolds ever did. And yeah, and I also think they handled the ick factor of the porn industry in kind of as un-icky-ish as that could have been handled. And just another fun thing about that is, like, there were so many people in that movie, so many actors and actresses that were right on the cusp of becoming famous. It was like this was the last kind of ensemble piece they did. I mean, everybody I thought was great. Ricky Jay, the former, who passed away, I think, what was it, 2-3 years ago?
Yeah.
The top card shark guy. He was so believable as the jaded cinematographer. And the mega extra way that you see the impact of video in the adult film industry. And of course, a little slice of life in the West San Fernando Valley, too.
I'll tell you what I found really kind of surprising about the history of that movie was the fact that Burt Reynolds didn't like it after it was done. I mean, first of all, it put him back on the map, and it certainly gave him a nostalgic boost and a really nice publicity push that was, I thought, fairly unprecedented since Pulp Fiction and John Travolta. So does anyone have any idea why Burt Reynolds seemed to have such an antipathy toward it?
I can tell you from just what I've heard from people my father knew, is that one of the things that drove people who work with Burt Reynolds crazy is that as soon as there was something good, as soon as he was done with it, he'd basically crap all over it. It was just like he was smack talking after Smokey and the Bandit made him a real star. He was smack talking how he thought that Hal Needham didn't do a great job with that. And I can tell you, I don't like to reveal my complete sources, but at least what I call my credible sources. My dad worked on the lesser Smokey and the Bandit called Convoy, which was kind of a copy of Smokey and the Bandit. It was those truckers CB movies. And it was amazing how much Burt Reynolds was just smack talking the entire genre that helped really propel his career into the stratosphere for a few years.
I got to tell you, Convoy is one of those movies that I think is one that's come back as well. I mean, it was. Yeah. I think Sam Peckinpah directed it, and
yes, he did.
And it was one of those movies that when I was in Tokyo, it caught the Japanese fancy. It was a massive hit over there. I mean, I saw it, and of course, I didn't understand the whole CB world, and yeah, I'll admit I'd like Smokey and the Bandit a lot more. But in retrospect, it was really. I think it's for a mid-level Peckinpah movie. It holds up really nicely. Hi, Addison and Denise. Welcome.
Finally made it.
Hi.
So right now, Jonathan just finished talking a little bit about Boogie Nights. So let me toss it to Scott. Scott, what's a movie that you find in this category?
Well, going back a few years, there's a film whose title everybody knows in order to make fun of it, and understandably because it became such a cliche. But a lot of people never watched the film as a film, and I know you did, Dan. But it's actually one of my favorite portrayals of people going through teenagehood and the troubles that they have. And that's I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
Oh, definitely.
People hear the title, of course, and naturally, of course, people are going to laugh at it because, I was a teenage communist, I was a teenager for the FBI and all these other things.
I was a teenage Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to make fun of it. But when you actually watch the movie, not only does Michael Landon give a knockout of a performance, it's actually one of the best performances of his career, but the way it presents the fact that he's troubled without understanding why he's troubled, he just is. I mean, knowledge of brain development and what happened to people as they're growing up and what it's like to experience growth spurts and the disparity between physical changes and brain changes when one is a teenager. You know, nobody knew anything about that. They just knew that teenagers were problematic. And the film actually does a brilliant job of laying out how he unconsciously is sabotaging himself over and over among other people.
I'll tell you something else I love about that movie, and that is I think it's better than Rebel Without a Cause in terms of really defining what teenagers' paranoia was. Because in Rebel Without a Cause, you have a fairly well-heeled family, but the parents, misguided though they might be, almost jokey though they might be, really do, except for Salminios, want the best for their kids. In this one, you have a guy who's in charge at the school, in charge of helping students. And what does he do? He gives them a drug for his own experiments that turns them into a creature and becomes a murderer. So here you have Michael Landon being absolutely right to not trust the adult figures. And the ones who reach out to him and say, no, no, you can trust us, like the cop and like his girlfriend's parents and all of that, they're wrong, because the people that they hand him over to are the ones who are agents of his destruction. It's really much more mature than its title would belie, and I think it's a shame that the rights holders of it are clinging on to it. It's really not been available to see since 1990.
Wow, I did not realize that.
I mean, I got a version of it that I recorded off of Showtime, and that was when it was all still analog, so it's not great. But at least I have the movie, and I've used it in class, and students laugh at the title, but by the time it's over, they're really quite surprised by it.
Yes. I was going to say, if you watch Rebel Without a Cause, the problems that people have are always outside of them. You know, you have Jim Backus being the father wearing the apron, and it embarrasses the son, so it's the father's fault why he is the way he is. And you've got, you know, everything is outside of them that's causing the issue. Not so much with Sal Mineo, that's people's prejudice against him, but especially with the James Dean character. Whereas when you watch I Was a Teenage Werewolf, there's a great scene where he goes to a party at an old wrecked house with his friends, and he gets startled by a friend coming up and he hits him. And it's purely this defensive reaction. It's almost like somebody you'd expect to have been in prison would do, this defensive gesture. And then he looks around at all his friends and they're just staring at him because this just came out of him out of nowhere. And there's no attempt to say that everything is everybody else's fault. The werewolfism is the fault of the doctor in it, Whit, whatever the actor's name is, Whit something. But he himself, he's got problems, and he's got problems because he's going through this development. And it's part of him, it's innate in him that going through teenagehood has made him overreactive and over-emotional and violently reactive. And so you have almost like a more sophisticated recognition of why someone going through that kind of pubescent change of life would act the way they do. And you don't see that in most films about kids at that age, not in any of the 80s Pretty in Pink type movies or The Breakfast Club or anything else. It's always the source of people's behavior is what people have put on them. And here, yes, you get some put on him, but also there's some innate aspects that are not being dealt with and that nobody knows how to handle. I just think it's really well done. It's
Addison, let me actually toss this to you, because you come from that low budget world where that rebellious side, but also that ability to be transgressive in terms of your message in the movie, because it's low budget and no one's watching you. So you kind of go under the radar. What do you think of I Was a Teenage Werewolf?
Well, I regret that I haven't seen it. I've only heard of it. It was never a title that I wanted to see. But as far as making them, it was that we didn't have time to worry about what they were saying or things like that. We had to worry about getting them out. You know, it was we usually had to release at least about 2 weeks after we wrapped production. It was release the film and it, you know, throw it together, cut it tight, throw it together and get it out, because somebody had probably already made some kind of a deal overseas to buy that particular title, which they sold without having a movie attached. So we had to go out and make the movie in like 2 weeks. So but getting back to your original question, unfortunately, I can't talk about it because I've never really seen it.
Denise, have you seen it?
No, I haven't. I'm trying to find another Patrick Swayze film that Addison asked about kids in a military school who have to take over the school. You remember?
Oh, Taps.
Taps, yeah.
Yeah, Taps is one, and in its own way.
Taps,
Okay.
that's the one.
Yeah,
That's the one I'm thinking of. Because it goes, from what I'm hearing, it goes almost 180 degrees from I Was a Teenage Werewolf, and it deals in enforced, where I'm thinking of, enforced discipline, being on the military school side. And there's that one kid in it who completely defies the military side until it comes time to actually stand up for the school. And then he realizes that, oh my God, I've been thinking all wrong and I haven't understood what it was. But I just thought it was rather interesting in that it was it dealt with the absolute discipline of the military to a kid. And having been through that,
He went to military school.
so I that was probably why I saw Taps, never saw I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
When you speak of Taps like that, wasn't that Timothy Hutton?
I don't believe so.
Am I mixing it with another movie? I'm sorry.
In my mind, I see Patrick Swayze and one of the Brat Packs, and I can't.
Nelson. Can't remember.
Taps movie cast. Let's see what we got. Timothy Hutton, George C. Scott,
I should never doubt the master.
Sean Penn, Tom Cruise, Evan Handler. No, Patrick Swayze.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
once
it does
again, I
have
bow
Tom
to
Cruise.
the.
I think Tom Cruise is the one who went all gung ho and started killing everybody.
He was the crazy one.
Yep. Addison, I think you're thinking of a Red Dawn.
I could be confusing them, yes. Red Dawn, wonderful. It's the original, the one with Swayze, was really good. Simply made, low budget, got the point across that, you know, hey, even though they're only kids, they're still patriots, and have one of my favorite lines ever in it, where they're asking the pilot that they find there up in the mountains. They say, well, what happened during the war? And he gives them an idea that, well, the bombs fell and everything like that. And, well, what happened after that? Do we have any allies? He says, yeah, 600,000 pissed off Chinese.
Oh, if only in those days, right? So Jonathan, have you seen either I Was a Teenage Werewolf or Taps?
Yeah, both. And I liked I Was a Teenage Werewolf because I thought it poked fun with sort of the teenage movies. I was a teenage whatever. And there was I remember my favorite scene, and I can't remember exactly what the dialogue is, but one of them comes back to his friend, and this guy's now a werewolf. And it's like he's more concerned with if that girl that he has a crush on likes him. That disconnect.
I think you're thinking of Teen Wolf.
You're right. I am thinking of Teen Wolf. So, oh well. But I thought that thing that was mentioned earlier was good. I think it highlighted what happens during puberty. It's like you wake up you go to bed 5'6", you wake up 5'8" the next morning. You're like, what the hell? So.
Well, also with Teen Wolf, you coming from the business side of the industry, that I believe was the first of the movies that was shot as an auction script, where it went out there with Michael J. Fox and the title and the project, and people had to bid on it, and they had like 3 hours to present the offers.
Yeah, they got that feeding frenzy going on, and I remember that, and that I'm not sure who picked it up ultimately, but I do remember hearing about that it was made kind of like a lower budget project, and then they screened it, and then you had like the distributors had something like a couple hours to make a decision on how to bid, which I actually kind of like. I think they should actually do that in the future, but I'd change it up or turbocharge it. I'd say distributors have to go into a room, and then they have to enter the octagon, and the last person standing gets the picture.
Yeah. It was Atlantic Entertainment.
That's it. I remember that name, Hazley, but I do recall it.
They were, I believe, in that pair of buildings that was on Sunset Boulevard right at Dougherty.
I'm visualizing it as we speak.
Yep. Was it Luckman Building? Something like that.
Yeah, the Luckman Building.
Did Disney ever do anything like a sort of a Teen Wolf thing?
Well, they've got all of the Kurt Russell computer wore tennis shoes.
Now you see him, now you don't.
The Shaggy Dog.
That's about as close as they got.
Yeah.
They got the flubber stuff where you
Yeah.
that's an adult.
Yeah.
You notice that Disney has, I know it's on the channel, but that Disney never really pushed any kind of a reissue of The Absent-Minded. What was it? What was the first Flubber movie? But they wouldn't push it in any kind of reissue of black and white.
It was The Absent-Minded Professor.
The Absent-Minded Professor is Jerry Lewis movie, I think.
No, Fred McMurray.
Oh, okay.
And then Son of Flubber was the sequel.
Got it.
Was an ass, something like that.
Yeah. Again, playing off on that almost 1950s horror movie thing. The thing about I Was a Teenage Werewolf, a lot of teen movies play up to the fears that teens have of people in authority. And it certainly got that in terms of the crazy doctor who turns him into a werewolf. But it also presents that view of teens and their problems that you get when you're a little bit past that age and you can look back on what it was like. So when you see him interacting with other people and becoming violent very suddenly without real justification, that's something someone who has gone through it would look back on at that time period. So it's got a more sophisticated viewpoint in terms of seeing trouble that's imposed on kids and self-imposed problems or self-generated problems, even if they're not intentionally self-generated, as opposed to other teen movies, which are made purely to present teens as first as victims of adults and then as heroes. So I like the idea that it has that more well-rounded kind of viewpoint. It's also got some really great, it was shot in 7 days. I think it was a budget of like 80,000 or 82,000 or something like that. It was shot in 7 days, and they have that great scene with the attack in the gymnasium where all they did was turn the camera upside down to show you the werewolf from the point of view of the gymnast who's on the parallel bars or whatever it is she's on. And it's just a great moment where she realizes she's about to be attacked, but she's upside down because she's in the middle of a gymnastics moment. And it's This is a very clever bit of shooting. And I think what it shows as a movie is that a really strong script, even if it's shot in 7 days, can really make a more powerful film if it's well written, and it was.
Great. Denise, do you have a first movie?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to cheat a bit. I have two honorable mentions before I go to my favorite. First honorable mention is 2015 Beasts of No Nation, not to be confused with Beasts of the Southern Wild. Beasts of No Nations is based on a book by a child soldier in Africa. And it is absolutely emotionally searing. I really think everyone should see it, but it's hard to watch. And it got zero recognition, well, no, I think Idris Elba got a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Written and directed by gentleman, Dan, I apologize. I know I'm gonna massacre his name. Kari Joji Fukunaga. I think he's an Swedish American director who wrote and directed it. It's and again starring Idris Elba. Extremely good movie. I saw it, I think, on cable. It's just incredibly powerful film, and nobody paid any attention to it. The second one is Roma J Israel Esquire with Denzel Washington, and in a stellar career, this is by far his best performance. It's also unique for him in that he's not playing a balls out, aggressive, assertive kind of guy. He goes totally opposite, 180, does a masterful job on this character. And I think Addison and I saw it in the theater, and there was like one other person there. So I really do think it's a shame. He did get a nomination for best actor, but I think it's a shame no one else saw it. And again, it speaks to one of the issues of films in general is that you keep waiting for something to happen. The thing is, it is a character sketch. It's a character profile. It's a kind of film that was very popular in the 60s and 70s. It's a kind of film Jack Nicholson's career was built on. And they just don't release them anymore. They don't release, say, this is this person. We're going to follow this person until his ultimate demise. And nobody knows how to market it because it's not flying glass, it's not special effects, it's not murder, it's not this. It's just a character portrait. And nobody's
that actually has an easy way of marketing. And that's the problem, is that people don't think of it this way anymore. In the independent run of films from the 80s, what they would do is they would, as part of their creation of the movie, they would say it's going to win we're going to plan for it to win an Academy Award. And you saw that strategy in play with things like Kiss of the Spider Woman and Trip to Bountiful and In Country and Jackknife. All of these movies, Platoon, they were all built around the idea these are uncommercial. We're going to keep the budget low, and we're going to get it to win a major Academy Award and cash in.
And unfortunately, they didn't do this with Roma J Israel, and nobody championed it. Maybe it was politics. Maybe it was studio politics. I don't know. If you ever get a chance to watch it, watch it. Now, for my favorite, I'm going with Lars and the Real Girl. I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting way of looking at mental illness, because if you boil it down, it is about mental illness, but I don't think there's been as fond a look at it since Harvey. And it's another example of an actor, like Scott said, an actor making the film work. Because Ryan Gosling is absolutely wonderful and endearing and funny. And he makes a completely unbelievable scenario work. He pulls you into it. Because not only is this guy falling in love with this sex doll, which he believes is a real girl, and falls in love with her in a platonic, romantic way, and presents her to his family, not only his family, the town, as his girlfriend. And because he's such a likable and sympathetic character, because he's so well loved in the community, the town goes along with him. And so it follows this episode in his life where he is in love with this anatomically correct sex doll, and how his progression goes. It really is a unique story. But I really think that if it had been anybody else other than Ryan Gosling and his talent for comedy and his charismatic, his sympathy, kind of almost James Stewart kind of appeal, that I don't think it would have worked. So that's my, and again, it takes a different look at mental illness. Most looks at mental illness are very dark, very, burdensome. And this is actually whimsical. And again, another film that's very definitely worth a look.
So anyone else seen it? Because I've got a little anecdote on this one.
How'd you know?
Okay.
Did you see it?
I don't think so.
No,
Well, I'm thinking of the other.
it's one of those 2 a.m. onto HBO movies.
When it hurts.
Yep. Okay. Lars and the Real Girl was one of the movies that I saw a couple of times when I was working at the market research company. And it was one that did, it was interesting because it had a lot of really good things going on it. For example, in terms of what people thought, it was scoring excellent at above average ratings, and it was very good way above average ratings. And its total positive was really high, and so was its definite recommend. So these are all things that should have led it to being something that was kind of a major hit, and yet it kind of didn't play out as well as it should. And I'm not sure why, because everything about it was just hitting on all cylinders. So maybe it was just the concept that was weird or something like that, because it really by everything it should have hit well. And I got to tell you that one of the other things that was really surprising about it is that it scored hugely among the non-Caucasian audiences. So it was speaking across demographics. So it's kind of surprising that it didn't do better.
Do you think marketing was afraid of it because of the whole sex doll idea?
I think so.
And it could have been released at the wrong time of the year. I can't remember what movie we saw a couple of years ago that should have been a big hit, but they released it in the middle of summer when it should have been released at Halloween time. Maybe it was Constantine that didn't do well. But there was some film that was just totally a fall winter film that they released in the middle of summer. Sometimes it's just the timing.
Yep. Yeah. But yeah, the very fact that it didn't outperform the Caucasian audience, but it was pretty darn close. It was much more so than one would have expected. Actually, it outperformed in the Hispanic Latino group.
Well, it has a very community kind of family kind of community feel about it, because again, everybody likes Lars in the town. Mm-hmm. And they all seem to accept that he's having this delusional episode, and they all treat his doll like a real girl.
Yep.
So it might be that appeals to a immigrant culture, because immigrants generally tend to have to be closer together, have to be within their own community, because they're doing multi-generational assimilation.
True. Jonathan, did I ask you what your first movie was? I'm sorry, I'm getting old.
No, it's okay. My first movie, and I know Dan and I've chatted a little bit about this before, because several other people like this too. It's a Hammer horror film called 5 Million Years to Earth. It's a remake of an earlier Hammer horror film called Quatermass in the Pit.
It's a remake.
I'm sorry?
5 Million Years to Earth is the U.S. title. Quatermass, it's a remake, but it was a TV series.
Right, and thank you for correcting me on that. It's I saw it when I was like preteen in Missouri. Why? I had just gotten home from being an extra on Tom Sawyer, and it was like both scary and intelligent at the same time. It has this incredible minimalism to it, which I just even today I think is great. It's a little dated. It has that British sort of, again, minimal approach, almost Thames television approach. But because of that, I think they did a really good job. And I like the fact that the horror, except for the end sequence, is very much suggested and reflected through the dialogue and what they're mentioning, and has a strange but sort of plausible explanation for like evil. It's like philosophically interesting too. And for lack of a better term, I just think it's a hoot. And the fact that it's a little bit dated, it does have this very 1960s feel. It's kind of fun. It's sort of a British, like, it's like watching a British version of three really good Twilight Zone episodes tied together. So I don't know if any of you have seen it or the TV series Quatermass, The Pit, on which it was based.
Well, I of course saw it on Money Movie 7 many times, and it recently had this pretty good Blu-ray restoration. And what's interesting about it is Keneally, who wrote it, Nigel Keneally, who wrote it, was always criticized for the very fertility of his imagination, because the big complaint about that movie, and maybe part of it is because it was a TV series originally, is there's too many things going on at once. First, you have the whole idea of these weird sounds coming from the subway. Then you have the spaceship. Then you have grasshoppers in the spaceship. Then you have Barbara Shelley having a brain transference and realizing these are creatures from a previous world. And then you find out that not only all of that, but these creatures are I believe, Satan. And then at the very end, spoiler, okay, it's over 50 years, too bad, that the devil comes out and you have to ground the devil into the earth. I mean, look at all that stuff that's in one movie.
Yeah, and it was pretty good too. It's just these little horned Martian creatures that are both repulsive, and they did a good job with like cutting into one of the autopsy and the green goo, so you could both look at it and it's repulsive at the same time. It's kind of an explanation. They go through that, you had the typical thing where they have the clever professor explain something to everybody, and you've seen that in movies like Ant, Them, basically. Is that they explain it's like, no, they were dying on Mars, so they had to have ritual slaughter. And when they sort of crossbred humans so that they could populate Earth, they just assumed that's how life was going to be. And then that explains where gargoyles and people seeing this creature. And I'll just cut to, one of the things is, one of the great scenes I find is I love what, how Neely was writing about all of that. There was so much going on, is that they tie it together with this sort of very typical jaded but wise, English Bobby, who grew up in that area where they discovered the UFO. And then he has the recollections, and you just see in his face recalling stuff that he was scared about as a kid. I just thought that was just done really well. So I thought it's like limited budget, like Addison was saying. They had to get it out. I think that thing was probably shot in about 3 weeks. Almost feels like old British rostrum TV show with a couple of exteriors, but at the end of the day, just really well done. And Dan, I don't recall the exact year it was released in the U.S.
It was released in 67.
67?
And I believe it was released in the U.S. probably 68.
Yeah.
And what I was found fascinating is that the director was Roy Ward Baker, who did 19 about the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah. So didn't he direct one or two James Bond movies in the 70s?
Not James Bond movies, but he did a lot of British horror movies like Asylum, Vault of Horror.
Yeah.
My own personal favorite of his is Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
Yeah. So anyway, a fun movie. I'd suggest catch it if you can. You can find it if you do a DuckDuckGo or Google search on video. You can usually find it in about 2 to 3 minutes somewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty popular. Anyone else see this?
It's of many times. I've never seen the TV show, though I'd love to.
It became available for the first time in the US fairly recently because it was shot on videotape. And so until really recently, you were unable to see it because it was shot at 25 frames per second. And until the digital age, you couldn't convert it. That's why for years we couldn't see the Honor Blackman versions of the Avengers.
Really? I never knew that was the reason. It was the PAL system?
It was PAL system. Mm-hmm.
All right.
And remember when they would first show I, Claudius and Masterpiece Theater upstairs, downstairs and things, how terrible they looked?
Mm-hmm.
That's because those were one on the safe side of being a kinescope. You know, that old system in the days before videotape when they would point a camera, a 16 millimeter camera at a TV screen and record it?
Yes.
It was one on the safe side of that, or the way they had to do those transfers.
Wow.
And it was considered, because it was black and white, I believe it was black and white, it didn't have any commercial viability.
Mm. Well, I'd love to see that, because I've always loved 5 Million Years to Earth. The whole idea of explaining spiritual evil phenomenon is being caused by this Martian interference with human creation, in which some people are in the in-group and some people don't have enough Martian in them. So they become the enemies to be hunted down, and all that is fascinating. And visually, you get that amazing scene where the guy who runs the sort of lunch counter or lunch wagon, whatever it is, starts getting chased by the force from the ship, which you never see. You just see the destruction that's whirling around him as it's chasing him through the streets. Is an incredible scene.
Yeah.
You know, in a pre-digital age, that's incredible. It's just wonderful. Very, very well done.
Yeah, that's one that I think its US reputation is based on the fact that it was shown on TV so many times in one of those initial syndication packages, because the British movies would get released on a much closer window to the local stations than American movies would. You know, something like Breakfast at Tiffany's would run on network well into the 1970s, while a British movie like that one would make it on a TV package in there by the early 70s.
Right.
Yeah, and from a business standpoint, I did some research into it, and it was part of a package of stuff that was syndicated, and I can't recall exactly which U.S. buyer it was, but along with Monty Python, you know, Monty Python's Flying Circus, which had a second life, but it's basically a bunch of stuff from Thames Television, and they said, we'll run it on PBS, see how it does, like they did with I, Claudius, and it turned out to be a runaway hit. But yeah, I recall that going into heavy rotation.
Mm-hmm.
I think I first saw it in 1974 when I was living in Missouri with my parents. My dad's working on Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and then I just remember it was one of those things, like Denise said, it was constantly on like some channel, like at 2 a.m. Like it was like, I don't know, the Freebird or Stranglehold or, you know, Tom Sawyer of rock stations. It was like played constantly.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has that advantage of being genuinely affecting without any gore. It's got no sex. And so it was perfect for those Saturday afternoon horror kind of get-togethers that when I was growing up were very common, you know, where you'd have some dressed up host dressed like a vampire, you know, some Count.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Kind of character. Yeah. And this would be one of the movies they would regularly show, along with the less bloody Hammer films and all of the 1940s and 50s Universal horror films and things like that. It was safe, but it was more intelligent than a lot of the other films like it.
If I can move back to a different, to what we were talking about earlier, a film came to mind that I have to say, back when I was very young, it was my first big film that I never outgrew, and that's The Wild One. And we were always talking about, we're talking about Rebel Without a Cause and those types of films. And The Wild One, I believe, was his first big hit. Nobody really thought it was going to be. And I always remember the one line where she looks at the back of his jacket and she says, BMRC, what does that mean? And he says, Black Rebels Motorcycle Club. She goes, what are you rebelling against? And he says, what do you got? great line for the time, because this is back by 59, 60.
54.
And it was 64?
54.
54.
I believe it was right before On the Waterfront.
Well, might have been. But I just remember it. And because of that film, I became a motorcycle aficionado. It was all because of that film.
Yep, it was the movie he made right before On the Waterfront.
Now that's a classic line.
My first unknown, but I feel classic title is a movie called Lady of Burlesque. And it was a United Artists movie made in 1943, so right in the middle of wartime. And it's a movie that's based on Gypsy Rose Lee's novel, The G-String Murders. And the reason I find this movie so fascinating is because it was made in the height of the production code. It was made during the height of World War II. And yet you have it with burlesque, you have it dealing with women who are clearly not just dancers. You have this relationship going on between the comics and the showgirls. You make jokes about needing a new appliance for the a replacement for the antique in the bathroom, which we all assume is a toilet, and it turns out to be a sink. And again, something that was done for the production code. So it's really fascinating in its production design and detail. And the movie begins with a shot of grand opera being played, and you see this marquee of a theater that's talking about the grand old opera house. And as the camera pulls down, we realize it's turned into a burlesque house, and that it's featuring Dixie, who is Barbara Stanwyck. And she sings this song called Take It Off the E String, Play It on the G String. And it's like, oh, please, come on. How did the Hayes office not know? And this was one of the first times when I first saw it that I came to think, you know what? The Hayes office knew exactly what it was doing. It just had to be performative, to pretend like it was going to shut something down. Hayes office wasn't going to go out there and say, we're going to shut the industry down and make it childish and hope that it could maintain its popularity. They knew that adults had to be able to appreciate it. So just like those cartoons, where when you see them as adults, you're kind of shocked at how risque they are. This movie does that. And when you look at Barbara Stanwyck in it, this is a star vehicle like no other. I mean, she gets, because we forget that Barbara Stanwyck was a trained acrobatic dancer. So she's doing this Russian dance thing where she's kicking and all, and you're looking at it going, wow, you really can do the deal. And when she's about to sing that first song, when she breaks through the entryway, she sneers at the audience, and it tells us everything we need to know about her, that she's nobody's fool. So when I hear a lot of people going on today, oh, well, movies in the past were just so sexist, and women were always just these victims, and they were so weak. And I'm like, okay, you've obviously never seen a movie made during the production code. Because in traditional Hollywood, there was no such thing as a big female star who was merely decorative. Almost every one of them had a mouth on her. And almost every one of them was able to take down men. I think the reason that this film, despite being directed by Wildman Wellman and having all this other stuff in it, I think the reason it's not better known is that the male lead in it is Milo O'Shea, who, okay, he played some good second leads where he's kind of like a cut rate George Brent. So he is good competition for the wallpaper. He's not bad in this. But he's also not charismatic. They really needed someone who was a great comic, someone who would have had that kind of Jack Benny type sass. And also the screenplay was written by a guy named James Gunn, who wrote All I Desire, which is another great Barbara Stanwyck movie directed by Douglas Sirk, and one of my favorite titles of all time, even though the movie's not that great, Born to Kill.
Right.
And so that's one. Did anyone else ever see this?
Born to Kill.
it's not great, by the way, and you know who the murderer is. I mean, he might as well, when you first are introduced to him, he might as well be wearing a big sign around his neck saying, "I'm the killer." It's really obvious. But as you're watching it, you realize it doesn't matter who the killer is. That's just an excuse to have this interplay between the characters and just really, and I'm going to say this, it's a morale booster, because you're watching these people who are from the bas-fond, the lower depths of society, and they are all absolute survivors. They are able to survive being raided. They're able to survive their opera house being filled with killers. They're able to survive a lot of the girls clearly having talent, but not having the opportunity. So it's about, we're going to make it work no matter what. And during that period of the war, I think that was the big message. And I feel that this film really gave it to people. So Brooke, what's your next movie?
My next movie is, well, I went back to the 80s, and I was, I'll say two. I think To Live and Die in LA.
Oh, yes.
I think that's a masterpiece. You know, Friedkin just continually puts them out. I just don't think he had the recognition for that one. And it's very complex and foreshadows a lot happening in society. And then I'd like to say another one, because I think it doesn't have the cultural resonance or knowledge today, because it has not had a life, I believe, I could be wrong, a life on the streaming, because the owner, distributors kept it, you know, kept all the rights to himself. And the reason I am saying this is I was recently having a conversation with, you know, young, you know, I guess you'd say 20-year-olds or so, interested in film, going into the film industry, and they had no knowledge of this movie. So that's why I'm saying it, and because it was such a staple of repertory theaters and theaters at the time, and it had a big cultural influence, but I don't think it's known today. And that is Liquid Sky.
Absolutely. So tell me, what did you love about Liquid Sky?
Well, I think Liquid Sky was very important. It came out in the early 80s. It really defined the edgy new wave New York. It had the androgyny. It really prefigured I think what was bubbling in the culture in New York, but unknown at the time. You know, the AIDS crisis. You know, people were starting to die, but I don't think they knew what it was, obviously. And so this movie has the sex equals death all over it, because the aliens are there to realize that the moment that people orgasm, the high is better than heroin. So they're going around and basically killing people at the moment of the climax. So so I think it really so it does play into the sex equals death and the disease and the scare, which will come later overtly with the AIDS crisis. It has the androgyny of the lead character playing both a male and female role. And so that was a big thing and very transgressive at the time. It really did, it just, you know, was a lot for the rest of the country and the world, like what was New York, the downtown scene, which, obviously was so popularly documented a few years later by Tama Janowitz in Slaves of New York, right? And when that movie was made, I believe that all takes place in 1982. So that when that movie was made in the late 80s, everything was period 1982. So they did had a big thing of the art department trying to recreate that moment in time. So there's a lot I could say about Liquid Sky, but those are sort of the basics. So
I got a question for Jonathan about Liquid Sky.
Yeah.
And this is really at the beginning of our career, so we might not know this at all. But this came out from Cine Vista, and I'll bet you that what happened with it, because it didn't have a DVD release until really recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll bet you what happened is that you had a bankruptcy and you had materials being haphazardly stored and thrown into different places. And because it wasn't necessarily a big high profile title, nobody went on a spelunking expedition to try to find it. So as an artifact, it was difficult to come by because it didn't have a big studio profile anywhere. So that meant it had to be seen primarily in repertory houses, which were going out at that time.
Exactly.
In probably relatively beat up prints because they were all part of the same circuit. It was right before home video really clicked in as big money, so it might have missed that exposure, and it was still relatively early days of HBO. So even though Eddie and the Cruisers had already happened, I don't think people realize the ability for HBO and home video to absolutely take a film that had not necessarily worked mainstream theatrical and make it really a cultural phenomenon. It might have been the wrong moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I know with some distributors, especially when stuff that they had gone, there had been a mini merger and acquisition, or some new, slightly bigger fish acquired the library of a slightly smaller fish, as it were. Back before, when that was just starting, sometimes they were like, yeah, it's not enough for us to be bothered about, duping umpteen number of Betamax cassettes or getting enough to pull out the answer print to replicate it. So, if you're an art house that can somehow get it, great. If it's not a big hit, forget it. And I remember it was kind of an interregnum between, video cassettes were starting, DVDs were coming into play, but there was I say between 81 and 84, 85, there was this 4 or 5 year period where stuff that should have been more available just wasn't. And I remember hearing a lot of the text of it's not worth our trouble to dig it out of where it is, or it was acquired by, some other target company, and it's just not worth it to reproduce. But I remember seeing it, and it was I thought it was, my reaction to it was, and not because of the sexual content, it was just kind of but I thought it was so well done, and it captured things even pre-MTV so well and so artistically. But I have a feeling a lot of people are it ain't Blade Runner, so we're not going to run it next.
Yeah, the soundtrack was very interesting too. Had a really great mood, feel, minimalist instrumentation. I think on an underground level, it was very influential, and it did, did play the repertory circuit at the time.
Yeah.
I think it did really well, but once again, as Dan pointed out, repertory houses were on the way out as home video started to rise, and the movie never had a second life on the streamers. And that's how the younger generation sees movies.
Yeah, exactly.
They haven't seen this movie. I just think in terms of a low budget filmmaking, creating a world, the milieu, it's really quite excellent. And so I it's been years since I've seen it, and I guess I'll have to order my my Blu-ray from the director's website or
Right.
on Amazon. I know the
No,
director.
I think it was released legitimately.
Yeah, he's yeah. It's you can get it on Amazon. It's got some DVD extras of a talk of the director and the star Annie, his name's Carlisle, at the Film Forum in New York. So it's got some stuff years later, but none of the cast went on to do anything. They didn't go on to act at all. So all very interesting, but it was quite a phenomenon at the time. And,
and as for To Live and Die in LA, I got a reason why that one didn't work.
Why?
Really sad, because it's a great movie. And it has that fantastic chase on the freeway.
Yeah.
It's because of cruising. This was Friedkin's, I believe, first big movie after Cruising, which in turn had come right after Sorcerer. So he was persona non grata. The fact that it even got green lit is kind of surprising. And when I think the animosity to him, because AIDS had hit so hard, and this came in 1985, so the bad memories of Cruising were so sufficiently strong that you had the gay mafia, such as it was at the time, absolutely saying, do not see this movie. And that held a lot of cultural sway at the time.
Interesting.
And it's sad, because now when you look at To Live and Die in LA, it holds up really well. And especially when you think all of those car chases and all of that's real.
Yeah.
And
the soundtrack by Wang Chung, brilliant soundtrack. And just the ending, that strange, ambiguous ending with Peterson. Never went, you thought he was going to be a big star after this movie. And, he has this, basically ends up on that TV show. Which is it, an NCS TV show? Later, but
I'm wondering if he had other problems. I'm wondering if he had a white powder problem or something like that, because he.
No, how horrible. That can't be it. Dan, what are you saying?
It's on CSI.
Defoe had a big career after that.
Yeah.
A career in features as a leading man, because he ends up on as the crime show years later, when he's already has the graying hair on TV.
But I think his association with Friedkin was sufficiently enough, because this should have been a breakout movie for him. But I think it coming as a tainted good, everybody associated with it had trouble. Because I remember Gerald Petrovich, who wrote the original novel, had problems selling his next book simply because To Live and Die in LA was considered a failure.
And there's also an interesting scene. Now, have you read the original novel?
Yeah.
Okay, this is great, because I want to read it. Maybe I'll borrow it from you. But there is that one scene that kind of prefigures what's coming worldwide, is the Islamic terrorism, where the guy on top of the Beverly Hills Hotel, and the president's there, right? So how much is that element in the book?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I can't remember the book that well. I remember the book was fairly close to the movie.
Okay. Yeah, it's just very interesting. It's the Beverly Hills Hotel. There's this terrorist, and and then let's go back to the money laundering plot.
Yep.
Or the money counterfeiting plot. Excuse me, and also great art direction. I think that probably the one star the one person who did have the breakout was Defoe.
Yeah.
And there's one, and I think to pick up the thread with Liquid Sky is the androgyny moments in that movie. Like the performance art thing, because you remember how big performance art was, and which we also see Daryl Hannah doing in What Legal Eagles, and the androgyny of Defoe and his girlfriend there. So it was also very much picking up what was happening in the edges of culture, the subculture, which was bubbling up and influencing mainstream culture.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of my top.
You know that also has an incredible series of controversial video transfers.
No, tell us.
The newest one that came out from, I think, Shout or whatever, or I might have been Synapse, I can't remember. That one is supposedly the best of them, but the one that came out in the UK has a completely different color grading than the US one. So you have a lot of people go back and forth on it. And as you know, Friedkin had this crazy habit of wanting to recolor all of his movies, and he came up with a crazy way of doing it. And that's what hurt the initial video releases, Blu-ray releases of French Connection and The Exorcist. So he goes in and tampers after the fact and messes up, or at least was messing up his stuff. So To Live and Die in LA in its DVD incarnation was roundly criticized for its mess up.
There's a new release that has.
It's not that new. I think it came out like 2-3 years ago.
Okay.
Might have been more recent than that, but yeah, the newest one is supposedly the one to get.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to get that one then, along with when I purchase Liquid Sky.
Anyone else have any comments on To Live and Die in LA or Liquid Sky?
So on TCM last week, I didn't get it. I mean, we just missed it. It was on TCM last week.
Right.
I was going to say, I know it sounds like name dropping, but my dad worked with Billy Friedkin a lot, but not on To Live and Die in LA or Cruising. My dad worked on Sorcerer with Billy Friedkin. It was funny. It was after Godfather Part 2 and then Sorcerer, my dad's career really took off. And it was funny, Billy Friedkin's career after Sorcerer really took a dive. For all the reasons you mentioned, Dan. Especially that he'd gone from being the wunderkind to the pain in the ass. And, To Live and Die in LA should have been a hit. It was like Miami Vice time. It was very much, captured the zeitgeist of the time, but it was just for the reasons you mentioned. And also I know that Billy Friedkin he was so difficult, like in meetings with studio executives, they were like, go away. So.
All right, Denise, do you have another title?
Actually by the same director of Lars and the Real Girl, and that is I, Tonya, which I saw a few weeks ago. Again, saw it, in the middle of the week. There is something to be said for unemployment. I liked it a lot. I'm really starting to become a fan of Greg Gillespie because he did Lars and the Real Girl, which I enjoyed. He did I, Tonya, which is, I think, extremely energetic and imaginative. Like we discussed before, it's almost got a screwball comedy kind of vibe to it. And he did Cruella, which I went to see it with 3 other friends across the spectrum in personal taste, and we all liked it. We all enjoyed Cruella. One thing Craig Gillespie's very good at and uses very well in I, Tonya is his music choice. His choice of music, because there's music playing all the way through that. And it's smart in that it doesn't necessarily side with Tonya Harding. It never lives, it kind of leaves that little open for this is all BS kind of thing. But it's nice to see Sebastian Stan play something other than the Winter Soldier, which shows that, yeah, he can act. You know, which I think it's unfortunate that more movies like this are not being made, where actors get an opportunity to actually do some acting instead of, you know, fighting in front of a green screen with wire work and things like that. Of course, Allison Janney is incredible as Mom, the woman you love to hate. And yeah, that's my other than the two that I had mentioned previously and talked about. I think Tonya, again, very good, but the main thing for me now is like, they are all the same. My three good films that I like, they're all on the same vision of Greg Gillespie, and I'm going to keep an eye out for him in the future.
I'll tell you something that was interesting about I, Tonya. I think it should have been a bigger hit than it was. And I think that that's one that's a prime example of mismarketing. Remember when Michael Ritchie used to do things like Smile and Break The Bad News Bears, and then he did this TV movie called The Completely Original True Story of the Cheerleader Murdering Mom. I just butchered that title. That had Holly Hunter in it, and it took this very kind of tragic, kind of sick story and filtered it through a real black comedy sensibility. And that's what I, Tonya reminded me of. And I was surprised it didn't do better. And I think it's because they were afraid of advertising it that way. The advertising I remember as being very rather straightforward and making it look like it was ice castles.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think they were probably afraid of the very strong domestic violence message in it, because she's not really portrayed as a victim at any point. I mean, she is a victim because of the circumstances, but she's also her own worst enemy. And it does kind of come across that. But there's an awful lot of scenes devoted to screaming and hitting and bouncing off the walls and things like that. And they may have been in this atmosphere. I think maybe they didn't want to go near that and celebrate a film that has that as such a large element without, you know, getting very dark and very victim oriented and preachy, I guess is the word I want. Because this film really isn't preachy, and that's one of the fun things about it.
It's true. Addison, do you have another one?
Oh dear, we're working on our second favorite film.
Our second favorite unknown film, and we'll come back to you. Scott, what's your second film?
Well, I've always had a love of anthology films, so I really enjoy, even as tawdry as they can be, I really enjoy Creepshow and all its sequels, and of course there's always Trick or Treat, which was one of those films that came and went in the theater and then became a big cult hit later. But to me, my favorite of the anthology films was one of the originals of them, and that's Dead of Night, which, you know, even a lot of horror fans have never seen it or even heard of it. It was the first British horror film made after World War II, because they weren't allowed to make horror films during the war because they wanted to cheer people up during it. And each section is done by a different director. Some of them are comics, some of them are more serious in the way that they're presented. And some of them were cut out in the original American release. The golfing scene, which is one of the big comedy scenes, was dropped. And I believe the Christmas party scene, which to me is actually one of the creepier scenes, was dropped, both from the American release. But it's an absolutely marvelous horror film. It's got a circular style to it in that it ends the same way it begins. It's got absolutely my favorite evil ventriloquist dummy sequence ever. I like it even better than Magic or The Great Gabbo or any of those. It's just an incredible ventriloquist sequence. And that's partly because Michael Redgrave is the ventriloquist in it. And he is absolutely superb. He really captures that haunted, psychologically falling apart moment. From what I've read, he actually considered it one of his best screen performances ever, and justifiably so when you see him do it. But the whole setup and the whole framework among the people at the country house is really marvelously done. And the way it cycles back at the end to the beginning sequence, and it actually inspired one, I think he was a physicist, to come up with the idea of the universe always being in a steady state and repeating itself over and over. And a lot of other films since then have used that idea of repeating the same moment over and over. I mean, Groundhog Day being one of the best of them. But as a low budget horror film that was brilliantly conceived, it's absolutely one of my favorites. I love that.
That's another one that has a very tragic home video history. It came out several times in really not so good versions, and then they've recently done a Blu-ray of it, and in no version does it have a proper soundtrack. So they must have an elements problem with it, because every single version, and this has been the number one criticism, because the picture's gotten better and better and better, it's still not great. So I have a feeling they don't have a camera neg, an inner positive, or maybe even an inner negative, because every version that I look at, you look at it and you go, okay, I'm pretty sure this is a 35, but I'm not positive, because it tends to be very contrasty, which means it's further down on the food chain. So I have a horrible sense that there's no good elements on it. And what you're dealing with is you're probably dealing with the best element being prints. And then from a print, you make a new inner negative, and then you make further prints from there. So you're way down the food chain. And that probably accounts for why the soundtrack is so bad. On the other hand, you know, for those of us who are of a certain age and grew up with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that movie has an especial fascination because, of course, the little girl in that number is Sally Ann House, who's truly scrumptious. So it's one of those weird connections between cult movies and cult movies that that movie exists in, and I agree with you. It's good, and on TV, and I think the U.S. release was missing that story because they thought it was too long.
Now, have they restored it for the DVD release?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
But there's no DVD of it where the soundtrack is good, and there's no Blu-ray or DVD of it where you look at it and you go, "Yep, this is from a really good source material."
It's just the scene where Sally Ann House, the girl at the Christmas party, realizes what's actually going on. There's something about that scene that really captures a sort of nip of otherness or this sort of creep up the spine better than far more elaborate horror movies that I've seen. It's just a simple moment where, and I could be wrong, maybe it's just a bad soundtrack, but it seemed like they did something to the sound at that moment in the scene where when she realizes who she was talking to and what was going on, that the sound around her starts getting blurred and muffled. And it makes her almost isolated from the rest of the party goers. Now, maybe that's just a bad soundtrack, but it was very effective.
No, I think that might have been an effect. I don't remember that specifically, but the soundtrack for the rest of the movie is just that. It's the whole movie. It's kind of hard to understand. So, as if I didn't have to do this anyway, I have to put the closed captions up so I can figure out what people are saying.
Understand. Well, especially in the comic scenes, like the golfing scene, that would be very tough because nothing ruins comedy like having to ask somebody else, what did they say? What did they say? You know, that just kills the joke right there. But the ventriloquist scenes in particular, because the dummy's voice is so harsh, I think it's fairly easy to make out. And Michael Redgrave's performance is a knockout. It really is. You can see him falling apart on screen. It's just incredible. One of his best.
I can give you one, Dan, since you asked me. You were kind enough. It's funny, another one just jumped into my head. Actually, The Mechanic.
Bronson movie.
Just fascinated me, and it was because the way he literally lost the weight to do it, and that was amazing. So the Mechanic would have to be one. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels would also have to be in that group. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels just broke me up. I just thought it was just hilarious. And we saw one last night, which Denise and I were sort of split on, and was called Milkshake Gunpowder. Or Gunpowder Milkshake. And it's very much along the lines of Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. The look is straight out of the comics. I mean, the colors are highly saturated. It's not reality to look at it. But again, it's along the same lines as Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. It's,
Machinist.
Oh, Machinist. Okay, so.
Machinist.
I'm old, and I'm older than everybody, so leave me alone.
He's talking about The Machinist, where Christian Bale lost so much money. And Equilibrium is another Christian Bale film that really wasn't a big hit, but was really, we both like a whole lot.
Anyway, those would have to be two of my choices. If I had to pick one between all of those, I would have to say Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Okay, well, thank you. I like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. And I think that one of the prime reasons why it's easy to hate Madonna is that when she married him, his career derailed really badly around the time when he did that remake of Swept Away. And I know it's unfair, but I think that it took a long time for people to look at him and take him seriously again after that.
Yeah, well, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels launched his career. And I think Madonna was like, oh, here's a director who can, put me in his movies. And that was the end of his, his career got, as you said, derailed for a while.
To be fair to Madonna, I think she's got a good sense for talent. I think she, sensed his talent, but I agree with Brooke that I think it was fully intended to exploit that talent for her own aggrandizement. And I don't think he really, redeemed himself until the Sherlock Holmes films. I think it took that. Absolutely love The Gentleman, by the way, which again is another film that didn't do that well. Brilliantly written. He wrote the screenplay. In my opinion, he's far better than Tarantino because he's, actually understands English language. He's articulate and witty, and the very smart thing about him, and it's in Snatch and in The Gentleman, is everything is dark comedy, dark comedy, dark comedy. And yet he always makes a point to have extremely serious moments that put everything into perspective. In Snatch, it's when Brad Pitt's mom's caravan gets burned with her in it. Everything's been very kind of witty and black comedy and everything until that moment. And The Gentleman has a similar moment. And that's what I like is he does have a moral compass, which I don't really think Tarantino does. And he exploits that moral compass, I think, to very good effect.
I agree. Jonathan, have you come up with another title? It's okay if you haven't.
Oh, no, I have. It came out about 15 years ago. It came out bookended by a lot of movies of a similar genre, but it's a movie called Smokin' Aces from 2006. The only reason that I saw it, or my wife and I went to see it, is sorry about the name dropping. My brother's roommate at the time had a not insignificant role in it, but it was one of those flying glass, slow motion, high-powered rifle shots. Jeremy Piven was one of the stars in it. Ray Liotta was in it. It was very much like a Tarantino film. But I think it was sort of a great ensemble piece. It was, if you put your brain in second gear, it was a lot of fun to watch. Especially because Ben Affleck has a small role in it. His character gets killed in the first 11 minutes, which I just loved.
But anything with Ryan Reynolds, Ray Liotta, and Wayne Newton, you're talking about instant gratification right there.
Of course, of that ilk. There were just, this was like the rise of things like, Too Fast, Too Furious, and the remake of The Mechanic, I think, and The Transporter. And it felt like one of those, 2 minutes into it, it's like, oh, Jesus, when we went to go see it in the theater. And then I was like, that was actually kind of fun as you kind of soaked into it, and didn't take it for high art. It was pretty well done for what it was.
I think it was also around the time of 8 Heads in a Duffel Bag.
Yeah, and what I liked about the movie is that it didn't take itself super seriously, and there were some really funny moments in it.
I'm sold. I have to watch this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of a mafia, FBI, modern day casino thing. So it's how would I describe it? It's
With
like
a little Three Stooges thrown in.
Yeah, exactly. The Tremor brothers, who basically were supposed to be the Three Stooges. So.
Yeah, this is one that I was surprised it didn't make more money.
They'll walk up.
It was good. I mean, it didn't do badly, but it made under 40 million in the U.S. and it didn't even double that worldwide, and yet it's something that should have had worldwide appeal.
Yeah, it's one of these films that you sit there and you watch and you go, look, it is what it is, but this should have been like more of a hit. Now, what I heard, I can tell you who my brother's roommate was, still good friends. His name is Maury Sterling. He plays the shorter Tremor brother in the movie. He says that they expected it to be a hit, and then when it wasn't an instantaneous first weekend hit, the marketing people at the studio were like, next, but it kind of built something of a small cult following. And I could see that when I went to go see it. It was like a Tarantino. It was like if Quentin Tarantino was handed the Fast and the Furious franchise and just did it much better, is what it felt like. So anyway, I'll stop, but it was just a funky film.
Well, and I always thought that Joe Carnahan would do more. And,
yeah.
And he kind of didn't. He's got good stuff, but it's just not. It's not at the level he should have been at.
Yeah, so it was.
Well, of course, he's done kind of too many remakes. I mean, really, Death Wish and Capone and all of that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So, but
Point Blank. He's not bad, but I think he could have been further. It seems to me that he's one of those directors that probably pissed off an agent at some point, so he didn't get included in all the big packages.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but yeah, I could totally see that.
Because really, this is a good movie, and it played well. So yeah, there's something not right there.
Yeah, because it seemed to me to really speak to especially the target audience, which was, to me, was kind of like folks younger than people like us of a certain age. So well, it seemed to be so well attuned to who they were anticipating the audience to be, and it didn't seem to hit that mark.
Yep. Okay, my last movie is Noises Off. It's a movie that was made in '92. For some reason, well, there's clear reasons, but it seems to have been buried, based on a hit show that was in the UK. It deals with performers both in front of and behind the stage, and it was very innovative because it flipped from front of stage to back of stage. It's directed by Peter Bogdanovich, and it's one of his better movies made since his golden period of the 1970s. And the cast is unbelievable. You've got Carol Burnett, you got Steve Reeves Christopher Reeve right before his accident. You have John Ritter, you have Nicolette Sheridan, you have Denholm Elliott. It's just one major performer after another. And Michael Caine, and for some reason it didn't do well. I think part of it might have been because this was probably the last picture Amblin did for Touchstone before they moved over to Universal. So there might have been a general feeling, let's kick you in the rear end on your way out. But I also tend to blame, and maybe this is unfair of me, but I just don't like her, Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall. I believe this was their first job together as creative producers, not line producers. And in the same way, you see a lack of indecision on her part in terms of a lot of the movies that get made. This one feels like you didn't have a David O. Selznick type producer willing to bust heads and take names. All the way through it, you have what seems to be post-production meddling, where clearly the ending is not the original ending. Clearly they tried multiple endings because now the ending is incoherent based on everything else that happens in the film. It's a happy ending where there's no way it could have this happy ending where this mess of a play becomes a big hit. It reminds you of that I Love Lucy or Special Lucy Desi Comedy Hour that had Tallulah Bankhead in it, where they mess up a play so badly that the audience thinks it's deliberate and it's a hit. That's the only explanation for it. Plus, all the way through it, you have these wonderful long shots, long takes that get broken up by, for some reason, I think it's probably the crew making funny faces like, oh, I can't believe these people are doing this crazy stuff. And it takes you out of the film. So if ever there was a movie that looked to me like it was deliberately screwed up in post, this is it. And it's sad because there's so much good stuff in it. Has anyone else ever seen it?
Yes, I've seen it.
Long time ago.
Yeah. And any other thoughts on it?
I remember it was funny.
Yeah. I didn't particularly remember the ending, which tells me how unmemorable that part of it was. And it's one of your philosophies that, a bad ending is what you take away with you after you see a movie. And it's one of those things, if you're reporting on it, if you say it's a great film, but the ending stinks, that is a turnoff for a lot of people. If you say
it had a fake beginning too, because it begins with Michael Caine coming into a theater and looking very nervous because he thinks the show is going to be a disaster. And then we get a flashback to 3 other times it was done, one time in front of stage, the second time as the personal lives are starting to interfere really seriously with what's supposed to go on stage. And then the third is on stage where everyone is messing up. And then at the end, Michael Caine hears the audience laughing and cheering, and he gives a fist bump and he talks about why show business is so great, and everyone takes a bow. And you're just looking at it going, I'm sorry, no. The entire framing device here is cocked up.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I still like the movie. Brooke, you said you saw it, and
Yes.
What were your thoughts?
Well, I haven't seen it for years. So if I had known this was going to be one of your movies, I would have gladly watched it. I just remember it being very talky. That's the only thing that I can conjure up.
It is very talky. It's play.
Since it is a play. So maybe that speaks to just appeal to a broad public. And that's not a judgment of how good the movie is. I remember going to it, being very excited because I saw it in the theater. I was very excited because it was Peter Bogdanovich, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oh my God, he's got another movie. And I was not satisfied. I remember that's what I recall, not being satisfied and being seemingly too talky. And I thought at the time, this is not going to do well.
And it didn't. But again, I have a feeling that it was made worse than it needed to be. Because when you look at it, you can't believe that somebody was sitting there saying, yes, this will make it, this cut, this drop in, these extras who for some reason have an inordinate place and break into every single comedy routine to tell the audience that they're supposed to laugh right now, that all of those things seem like something that someone who's a good producer would say, absolutely not, you're not doing that. That's going to ruin this. So there's something really suspicious about the way it came out.
If you watch it, it feels like some of the filmed versions of Neil Simon plays, like Plaza Suite and things like that. And they worked. So there's really no reason why it wouldn't work unless, as you say, there was some interference with it. I mean, you expect a filmed Neil Simon play to be talky, but you still expect to be entertained by it. And there's no reason why the whole of Noise Is Off couldn't have been that well done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a real lost opportunity. I just love it because of the cast and the good moments, but the bad things about it are really grating.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think it's well worth people exploring. Anyone have any final words?
I was just gonna say a bunch of fun. It's always great hearing, the lesser known stuff and the approach to that. And it's like, I learned about some other films I hadn't thought about or seeing films from other ways. So fun and informative.
Yes.
We should do something. We should do something on the B movies, which supported the A's for so long.
That's coming.
Disney.
I like it.
I may have more to say then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all very much, and I look forward to doing this again very soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Good seeing you all again. Thanks.
Bye.
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 So thank you for joining us again for another one of our groups where we discuss Hollywood's past, movies that you should see, movies that for some reason or other have been under the radar, bad movies we love, and more. And this is exactly why all of us have loved the movies, and we hope you do too. By the way, if you enjoyed this, please also check out my new tech channels on Rumble and BitChute. I will include links below. Thank you again.
Come on and give me heat, 'cause I don't like my music sweet. I wanna feel my impulse beat. Take it off the E string, play it on the G string.